Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the City of Ottawa's virtual celebration of the United Nations International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Bonjour à tous. Bienvenue à la célébration virtuelle de la Journée.
Welcome to you all to the the United Nations International Day of Persons with Disabilities.
My name is Tyler Cox. I am the Manager of Legislative Services at the City of Ottawa. For those who cannot see me, I am a white man in my 40s with a short beard and a bald head. I'm wearing a navy blue suit with a matching necktie. It is my pleasure this morning to introduce you to our MC, Lucille Berlinguet-Saumur. This will be Lucille's last accessibility event with us before she retires after 34 years with the City of Ottawa. Lucille has been instrumental in creating disability confidence and an accessibility culture at the City of Ottawa. She's achieved this through relationship building within the disability community, assisting the corporation in developing foundational accessibility tools, such as the city's accessibility design standards, and by creating older adult and accessibility events. Lucille has built an amazing team of accessibility champions throughout the organization. Lucille often talks about the fact that once you work in accessibility, you can never remove your accessibility lens. It simply goes with you into your other positions. This must be true since although Lucille is retiring from the City of Ottawa, she tells us that she plans to continue to share her expertise with various accessibility related organizations at the local, provincial, and national levels. I want to thank Lucille for her dedication to the City of Ottawa and to our community, and for being a wonderful colleague. Over the next few weeks, Lucille will be handing over the keys to the Accessibility Office to her successor, Megan Richards. Like Lucille, Megan is a foremost expert in accessibility. For more than 15 years, Megan has been delivering services to people with disabilities. In addition to her relevant degrees, Megan's expertise in accessibility has been formally recognized by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. All this to say, please rest assured that accessibility at the City of Ottawa remains in safe hands. It's my pleasure to now introduce our MC, Lucille. Lucille, congratulations, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Tyler, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your kind words, and it's been a pleasure for me to see the City of Ottawa mature over the years around accessibility. And congratulations also to Megan. I know you're in wonderful hands. For those who cannot see me, I am a Métis woman with long brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing a black shirt with white polka dots, and I'm in my 50s. That's why I can retire. It's a privilege and an honor to be here celebrating once again with you today. Before we begin, here are a few housekeeping items to ensure everyone can participate accessibly in our event today. This event will be simultaneously translated in English and French. To follow along in English only, you can select the interpretation or the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and choose English. You will then only hear the English audio. Pour suivre en français, vous pouvez sélectionner.
To follow in French, you can select interpretation in the meeting settings, then choose French. You will then hear the audio translation.
Captioning in English is available by selecting the captioning or CC button on the bottom controls in Zoom and selecting English, or through the link shared in the email you received before the event. We've also just put the link in the chat, which allows you another option. Il est possible d'afficher le sous-titrage en français.
You can view the French subtitles via the link provided in the email you received before the event. And we've also put it in the chat just now.
For those who require American Sign Language, you can pin the ASL interpreter by clicking on the three dots in the upper right-hand corner of the interpreter's video and selecting the pin icon. Et pour ceux qui ont besoin de la langue des signes
For
québécois,
those of you who need Quebec Sign Language, you can pin the LSQ interpreter's video by clicking on the three little dots in the top right-hand corner of the interpreter's video. Then you choose pin.
Thank you to all our support teams today for helping ensure our event is accessible to all. Before moving on to hearing our various speakers this morning, I would like to recognize that Ottawa and across the country, our work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais reconnaître qu'à Ottawa,
Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Ottawa and across the country, we're working on traditional Indigenous territories.
on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable contribution, both past and present, to this land. Research shows that Indigenous persons with disabilities often experience discrimination and face additional barriers compared to the general population because of this intersectionality. In our work to increase accessibility for all, may we be mindful of our Indigenous peoples and work towards reconciliation and inclusivity to include the voices of Indigenous persons with persons with disabilities is an annual observance that promotes an understanding of disability issues and mobilizes support for the dignity, the rights, the well-being of persons with disabilities. This event takes place globally on December 3rd each year. This year, we have chosen to recognize this event today, November 30th, to ensure the largest number of people across the city and beyond can be in attendance. I would now like to take a moment to welcome a few dignitaries to our meeting. We'll be hearing from them today. His Worship, Mayor Sutcliffe, good morning. Councillor Marty Carr, Councillor Liaison to the City of Ottawa's Accessibility Advisory Committee, Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair Vania Karam and Vice Chair Dr. Holly Ellingwood, and Dr. Jay Dolmage, our keynote speaker. Good morning, everyone. I would also like to thank the many members of Ottawa City Council, along with the members of the senior leadership team who have joined us today to dedicate this time to learn more about how we can advance accessibility and remove barriers for our residents, visitors, and employees. So to begin our event, I'd like to invite Mayor Mark Sutcliffe to say a few words and to present the proclamation. Mayor Sutcliffe.
Thank you so much, Lucille, and thank you for all you've done for the city. Thank you for your service, and congratulations on your retirement. You seem too young to retire, if I'm honest, but good for you. Congratulations, and congratulations, Megan. Looking forward to working with you. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm really glad to be speaking with you today and to be joined by my colleague from Ottawa City Council, Marty Carr. I'm speaking to you from my office at City Hall in downtown Ottawa, and I want to start by extending my gratitude to all of you for being with us here today to celebrate the annual International Day of Persons with Disabilities, proclaimed by the United Nations in 1992. So welcome. Permettez-moi de vous souhaiter la plus cordiale bienvenue.
Let me extend a warm welcome and thank you for joining us here today to mark the annual International Day of Disabled Persons, proclaimed in 1992 by the United Nations.
My council colleagues and the senior leadership team for attending this important event and for ensuring that accessibility remains a priority throughout the decision-making process across the city of Ottawa. This day celebrates the efforts made by people, by municipalities, by organizations, by agencies, and by all others who help to identify and eliminate the discrimination, marginalization, exclusion, and barriers that people with disabilities face. The UN theme for this year is United in Action to Rescue and Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for, with, and by persons with disabilities. As a city, this theme encourages us to work collaboratively in the way we plan, in the way we do business, including highlighting the importance of consulting with, actively seeking feedback from, and working alongside our community of persons with disabilities. So today is an opportunity to celebrate the contributions of people with disabilities and disability organizations. But importantly, it's also a day when we can acknowledge that there is a lot more work to do. Nous devons toujours chercher des moyens.
We must always to find ways to improve accessibility and to make this space welcoming for all residents in Ottawa.
I'd like to highlight a great example of the work which has been done over the past year, as outlined in our City of Ottawa Municipal Accessibility Plan. Our Accessibility Office and the Public Policy Development Team in Emergency and Protective Services collaborated to develop a list of accessibility considerations throughout the bylaw review process. Some of the key components of this list include reviewing legislative history, having open lines of communication with our Accessibility Office and the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and engaging with the broader community of persons with disabilities with lived experiences in order to identify opportunities to remove current barriers and to improve overall accessibility. At the heart of our efforts in advancing accessibility through this process is consulting with those who have lived experience. That's so important. The steps that we take toward accessibility results in making Ottawa more inclusive. Accessibility is about creating communities, workplaces, and services that enable everyone to participate fully in a society without barriers. And I know Councillor Carr will be echoing these sentiments, but I wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of our AAC members, both past and present, who have worked tirelessly and who have dedicated their time, their knowledge, their skills, their energy, their commitment to increasing accessibility at the City of Ottawa. So please join me in congratulating and acknowledging all those who work to make the City of Ottawa more accessible and more inclusive to our residents. Félicitations à tous ceux qui travaillent pour rendre.
Congratulations to all of those who make Ottawa more accessible and more inclusive for our residents.
My honor now, on behalf of Ottawa City Council and the City of Ottawa, to present the proclamation of International Day of Persons with Disabilities in Ottawa. And I'm presenting it to the Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair, Vanya Karam, and Vice Chair, Dr. Holly Ellingwood. Big thank you to both of you and to the entire committee. Merci beaucoup. So I'll read this here. I'm holding this up now. This is the proclamation for those of you who can see it. Whereas December 3rd marks the annual United Nations International Day of Persons with Disabilities, a day celebrated worldwide to promote an understanding of disability issues and mobilize support for the dignity, rights, and well-being of persons with disabilities. And whereas the City of Ottawa's accessibility policy outlines our commitment to the AODA and establishes equity to people with disabilities in the use and benefit of city services, programs, goods, and facilities, and plays a vital role in identifying unconscious biases and eliminating ableist attitudes and barriers that affect people with disabilities. Et attendu que le thème de cette année, unis dans l'action
The
pour
theme this year, United in Action to Rescue and Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for, with, and by persons with disabilities. A call to a revitalization of efforts at every level of the government, of civil society, of the entire community in the world, through actions and cooperations.
Mark Sutcliffe, Mayor of the City of Ottawa, do hereby proclaim December 3rd, 2023, International Day of Persons with Disabilities in Ottawa. So over the coming years, as we strive to ensure full accessibility in Ontario and across the country, our city, the City of Ottawa, will continue to look for innovative ways to be working with persons with disabilities in our community, and we will continue to rely on the support and feedback provided from our amazing Accessibility Advisory Committee. Thank you so much for including me in today's event. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mayor Sutcliffe. Our office is so grateful to work closely and collaboratively with you and your team on various accessibility-related projects that have come up within the first year that you've been in office, and we look forward to continuing this relationship in the years to come. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to introduce Councillor Marty Carr, the Councillor Liaison to the Accessibility Advisory Committee, who will be speaking about the group's mandate, as well as the many benefits this committee brings to the city and to its residents. Councillor Carr, good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Lucille. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone.
It's my pleasure to be here with you to celebrate this important day. Within my role as Councillor Liaison for the Accessibility Advisory Committee, I've had the opportunity to work closely with this group and promote their work among my council colleagues and city staff. This term, our Accessibility Advisory Committee consists of 12 members from the community. Due to the time, commitment, and dedication these volunteers give on a regular basis, we've been able to work together to increase accessibility within the City of Ottawa. I would like to personally thank Committee Chair, Vanya Karam, Committee Vice Chair, Dr. Holly Ellingwood, Wayne Antle, Ian Bury, Ana Maria Cruz Valderrama, Matthew Elliott, Jody Fisher, Adele Fury, David Humphreys, Murray McDonald, William Van Veen, Hannah Wallet. In order to ensure that the experiences and perspectives of people with disabilities are considered in our daily work, regular community engagement and feedback are sought during the development and implementation of city projects, plans, programs, and services. The committee now meets 8 times per year with additional special meetings as required. The city benefits from the accessibility lens provided by those with lived experiences when consulting on projects, not limited to those required under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. In addition to their meetings, the group provides valuable feedback and support by email, and many members participate in working groups or other subcommittees. While this new committee only had their first meeting in May of this year, they have been very busy and engaged since then. During this short period, they have already consulted on a variety of projects, including, but not limited to, update on the new civic campus within the Ottawa Hospital, the on-demand accessible taxi study, the clothing donation box bylaw review, the affordable housing capital plan overview, the use and care of roads bylaw review, Bank Street cycling and transit improvements, Lansdowne Park 2.0, and the on-demand transit demonstration pilot project. The 2020 to 2024 City of Ottawa Municipal Accessibility Plan highlights that engagement with persons with disabilities is critical and follows the federal government's Nothing Without Us strategy borrowed from the Accessible Canada Act. I would like to thank our Accessibility Advisory Committee for their countless hours of volunteered expertise and invaluable feedback. It is through their efforts that the city can ensure that policies, projects, services, and facilities are developed with and through an accessibility lens. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carr, and special thanks also to the interim city clerk, David White, and the city's senior leadership team who support and drive all of these important initiatives. We will now move to hear from our Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair, Vania Karam, and Vice Chair, Dr. Holly Ellingwood.
Thank you, Lucille. So Mr. Mayor, councillors, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens of Ottawa's disabilities community, happy International Day of Persons with Disabilities. We would like to start by acknowledging that we are speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, whose presence on these lands extends to time immemorial. Today is an important reminder for us to connect with our Indigenous neighbors to learn more about their culture and Indigenous understandings of disability. Nous sommes rassemblés aujourd'hui au nom du comité.
Today we are gathered with the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Its mandate is to advise the city on policies, services that disabled people may benefit from, so that Ottawa can be an accessible city for all. Amongst all of these committees, our committee is the only one that was created because of legislation. It was a requirement under the law on accessibility for disabled people.
The intent is to ensure that city staff consult with our committee on a regular basis to make sure that the city is meeting the requirements of the Act. We would like to extend a special thank you to our members for their volunteer commitment. We are dedicated to making sure that we get accessibility right, to build an accessible, inclusive city that welcomes the diversity that disability brings to our communities. This year's theme is United in Action to Rescue and Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for, with, and by persons with disabilities. I'm not sure if my Vice Chair, Holly, is on the line. If he is, I would ask you to please join, and if not, I will continue.
Vania, it's Megan. We've had some technical issues with Holly, so you can continue on. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. The idea behind sustainable development is meeting the needs of people today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is a poignant theme because here in Canada's capital, we have the opportunity to invest in inclusion, knowing that the downstream impact will make Ottawa a fairer and more equitable city. Accessibility and inclusion can and must be a defining strength for our city, so that persons with disabilities can contribute meaningfully and bring their skills and experiences to the table to help us solve the difficult challenges we are facing. In Ottawa, more than 260,000 people, or almost 1 in 4, live with a disability. This increases with age, and almost half of seniors live with a disability. Many people with disabilities are at the margins of poverty. They aren't able to find affordable housing, and they are uncertain where their next meal will come from. The Sustainable Development Global Agenda calls for an end to poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring peace and prosperity. Accessibility and inclusion are cornerstones in pursuing this universal vision. To level the playing field and develop solutions, we need to ensure that those with lived experiences are involved in the co-creation and co-development of those solutions. The 2019 Accessible Canada Act is advancing the need across priority areas to reach the goal of Canada being fully accessible by 2040. While this is groundbreaking legislation, it is not enough on its own. We need a community of support and for people to come together with their hearts and minds to recognize the unique strengths and abilities of each individual. I'm willing to bet that every one of us knows someone who has a disability, including many of us in attendance here today. If we stop and ask ourselves, what can I do in my own way to make my community a better place to live? We'll probably come up with many interesting ideas. It might be just taking the time to think about situations that we encounter day to day, and if they are accessible to everyone. And if not, how can we work together as a society to improve things? Je me pose chaque jour le défi. Et j'invite
I put this challenge before me every day, and I invite every one of you to have the same challenge, to think, what can we do today to ensure a better tomorrow? How can we promote a vision for sustainable development and make our city more fair?
L'accessibilité se compose uniquement.
The Accessibility Advisory Committee is comprised of volunteers. We are members of the community in Ottawa who want to make a change and who work together to build a city that is more inclusive and more accessible.
Our members serve on various subcommittees, for example, Paratranspo. We also provide advice on new facilities that are being built, for example, the new Ottawa Hospital. We ensure that accessibility is considered in various projects and initiatives. And we provide advice on topics such as accessibility of parks, public spaces, street design, and accessible public transportation. While our members do our best to ensure the advice we give is accessible to the public too. This ensures that people can understand how accessibility is considered in all of our city's initiatives and projects. Understanding what city staff and councillors do with our advice is also important. We are working with the city to improve transparency on this. This work is so important. It is a privilege to serve as a member of the committee and a serious responsibility that we hold to our hearts. We encourage anyone with an interest in disability inclusion to apply to be on the committee the next time applications are open. Avant de terminer, nous tenons à
Before I finish, I'd like to thank our liaison for the committee, Councillor Marty Carr, for being a fantastic ambassador for this committee. I'd also like to thank the teams on accessibility and the clerk's office, who have been an extraordinary support. We would also like to help, most notably, Rosa Ramos, the coordinator of this committee. Without their support, our work would not be possible. Finally, I'd like to thank all of our residents in Ottawa. Your opinions are precious, and we sincerely appreciate your contribution.
In closing, on this day, we encourage you to reach out to your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors who have a disability, to learn about them, this community and its richness, and most importantly, how to act in solidarity and allyship to create a more accessible future for all of us. To those who are part of our city's wonderful disabilities community, celebrate today. Celebrate the diversity you bring. Celebrate the contributions you make. And most importantly, be proud of who you are. Happy International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vania. And I see, Holly, you've been able to join, so welcome. I'm so glad technology is working finally. So we do see you there. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you very much for the update on the work of the Accessibility Advisory Committee. I know the group has only been active for the past 7 months, but the city is so grateful for the invaluable support and feedback you all provide on our projects, our plans, our initiatives. It's through this cooperation that we can continue to strive towards making accessibility and inclusion a defining strength for our city. Thank you for all of your work. Now, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Jay Dolmage, Dr. Dolmage is a professor and chair of the English department at the University of Waterloo and has spent his career committed to disability justice through his scholarship, service, and teaching. He is the author of several books on the subject of ableism and disability, as well as being founding editor of the Canadian Journal of Disability Studies. Thank you so much, Jay, for joining us today.
Thanks so much. I need somebody to let me start my video. There we go. Thanks so much for having me. So yeah, my name's Jay Dolmage, and I'm a middle-aged white guy. I'm in my office, which is all full of books. I'm an English professor, and so I guess that makes sense. I've got dark glasses, thinning hair, a blue shirt on today. It's cold here and snowy in Waterloo, and I'm imagining it's similar in Ottawa. Today, I'm going to be talking about higher education where I work as a kind of case study or an example of the ways that larger social institutions structure our relationships with disability. And to begin with, I want to start by saying that higher education, like many other institutions and value systems in our society, is ableist, right? In fact, higher education employs what we would call ableism as well as disableism. And I think it's important to understand those two different but connected things if we want to understand how any society works. So to begin with, and I'll move to the first slide, disableism, sorry, if we can go one more beyond that, maybe I don't have a slide for this, that's okay. Just we'll go back to the beginning, that's fine. So to define disableism, and the ways that it's different from ableism. Disableism is defined as a kind of set of assumptions and values, and these can be conscious values or unconscious ones, that promote the unequal treatment of people with disabilities because of the negative construction of disability. Disableism tells us that there could be nothing worse than being disabled, and treats disabled people unfairly as a result of those values. On the other hand, ableism, instead of situating disability as bad and focusing on that stigma, positively values or sometimes requires or mandates able-bodiedness. Disableism constructs disability as negative, and ableism renders disability as a more vaguely negative thing or as invisible, disposable, or undesirable. While able-bodiedness is represented as ideal, normal, and something that everybody should aspire to. In higher education, you can understand how that works, right? I look around my campus and I see advertisements for athletics and recreation that say, if you work out, you'll be able to study harder. So there are these social, academic, intellectual, and physical kind of requirements all around us that tell us that we need to be perfecting our minds and bodies. So also, I think, on our campuses and throughout our society, the demand to overcome disability, research to cure disability, all of the teaching we do to kind of rehabilitate and make disability go away, all of these things feed into the ableism in our society and make people believe that being disabled is negative and to be avoided at all costs. That belief leads to structures in which disabled people are neglected, live in poverty, are underemployed. In my own context at the university, it means disabled students just don't make it. And then their life options and choices shrink considerably. Importantly, ableism is not just a list of bad words, right? It's a structural part of our societies, and it leads to, it can lead to violence, it can lead to poverty, underemployment, etc. I also think within our culture, ableism is something that becomes hard to question because we're all told we need to be acting as able-bodied as we can at all times. But also for those folks who are in power, acknowledging that the systems that gave them power, for example, through universities, acknowledging that those things are ableist also means acknowledging that their own privilege might be built on that ableism. And it's very difficult for people to do that. But I think then it's really important to pay attention to how ableism occurs and to whom and to what effect. And also to think about what else ableism is connected to in history and practice, but also in our own lives and careers. So I'm going to give you an example of how ableism works in my own workplace. If I could show the first slide. This picture is of the old Hagee Hall. It's a building I'm working in today at the University of Waterloo. We look up at a huge set of stairs leading up to each level of the building. There are 3 of these levels in all. The building itself is this brutalist architectural design built of concrete and brick with small windows along each floor. Each floor is also stepped in the front so that the top of each of the 3 floors provides a small walkway. There are these sculptures there, these bright, the people have called them the cocktail forks sculptures that are no longer there, but we see those on the first set of steep steps. But if you look around universities, you see stairs like this everywhere. And on a day like today that's snowy in Waterloo, when these stairs were there, there's only a very narrow path that was even shoveled, right? And it's a long way to go up to the 3rd floor, which is where I work, right? The other thing I'll say is that the elevator was as far away from these steps as it could possibly be. And that elevator was a freight elevator near the freight entrance. So it's where deliveries came in and garbage went out, right? And there's a statement that's made there in showing that the accessibility of a space like this is really at the back of the building, right? And is really shared with these kind of industrial needs rather than the academic ones. I think in government, in our cities, we see lots of similar steep steps. Whether in Ottawa or if we can go to the next slide, in this example in Washington, D.C. This is a famous protest in the disability rights movement in North America. It was captured at the March 1990 ADAPT protest calling for the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it shows a perspective of 2 particular disabled people who left their crutches and wheelchairs at the bottom of the stairs and then climbed up the steps, right? And it was a statement about the fact that legislation, rights, these things were out of reach for many disabled people, figuratively because they have the steep steps to get up and to be part of the process, right? But also practically in the sense that their rights weren't protected by law at that point in time. The image depicts a view again from the bottom of those steps looking up at the Capitol Dome, and the steps seem very steep. We view 2 individuals, one crawling forward on the stairs with his or her back to us. The other individual, a young Black woman in the foreground, seems to be moving up the steps backwards, 1 step at a time. Her torso is facing us, but her head is turned around in the other direction. There's a photographer further up the steps taking a picture as well. If we can move to the next slide. The extensive stairs at the center block of the Parliament buildings in Ottawa could be seen very similarly, right? And perhaps with an added sense of irony, given that a statue of our disabled Canadian hero, Terry Fox, looks right at these stairs from across the street every day. And in this image, we see a Mountie on those steps. It's a much more kind of neo-Gothic architecture in this building. And there's a series of flags on either side of the building representing different countries. So these things are real and we can look around them. I want you all to think about how these steps exist in your daily life, in your workplace, right? In the places that you need to and want to access to be part of your community. But they're also a metaphor, right? And in higher education, I think they've been a really powerful metaphor about who deserves to have access to knowledge, information, and power. And I think in government, they've been a really powerful metaphor in the same way, right? The steep steps step our society in terms of keeping marginalized groups away from access to education, for example, right? But our institutions are also seen as performing a kind of turning that stepping into a verb, right? Performing a function of pulling some people up the stairs, but also arranging other bodies along the stairs or at the bottom of the stairs, right? I think universities in particular continue to function to keep certain groups of people out of the workforce, away from status positions, away from knowledge and dialogue and power, and not just through admissions, right? We know that 24% of first-year universities self-declare as having a disability, but only 6 to 9% of those students get help, for example. We also know that we have a generation of students right now, and not just students, we have a generation of young people who are much more likely to experience disability, in particular mental health related disability, and much less likely to seek help. And this is one of the ways that those steep steps as the metaphor are working, right? And like I said before, the outcomes are poor for students who don't complete their university degrees, right? We also know that, for example, disabled students who do graduate end up with 60% more student debt. And of course, that's not just in higher education, right? That's in K-12 education. That's in so many other parts of our society. I also want to speak specifically to particular disciplines, right? For example, disabled scientists have been responsible for discovering at least 22 elements of the periodic table, right? But those scientists face huge barriers to their participation. Because of a lack of access, research indicates that only 4.3% of disabled students choose natural sciences as their field of studies. We can definitely assume that the barriers to accessing science in Canada are similar. It's upsetting, but it also tells us that removing barriers to access could help increase the number of students with disabilities who enroll in those kinds of programs and improve their numbers. And we know, for example, that we need disabled people. We need their input to help us solve the biggest problems we face as a society, especially something like a pandemic, right? The last 4 or 5 years should have taught this, right? But we have so systematically excluded disabled people from being involved in making those decisions that in the end we lose that capability to imagine solutions that would work for all of us, right? I also want to speak about faculty because faculty in Canada receive very little support, right? We have accommodations policy for students, but we have very few accommodations policies for staff or faculty. Only 42% of Canadian universities even have a policy for faculty, right? It means then that accommodations are not provided, and we have a culture of silence and passing. The question for you then is, what kind of representation, what kind of policies are there for disabled people in your own workplace? What are the barriers that disabled people face for advancement? What are the politics of disclosing disability really like, given the fact that we know that incoming generations of workers are less likely to ask for accommodations and support? And we know that ableism and disableism exist, right? And how could that steep steps as a metaphor be applied to your own experiences, not just through your own education, but through your own career, through your own career and through your own career goals? Okay, so that's the first metaphor that we're working with, right? I also want to suggest that, in higher education, disability has been something that's studied, right? Rather than seeing disabled people as those who might teach or study or research, we see disability as something that is researched. And I'd suggest, for example, that the medical profession has had a similar lack of imagination about the role of disabled people as doctors, nurses, and researchers themselves. And what other professions share this lack of imagination about disability, this surprise when disabled people appear, right? Certainly the steep steps and inaccessibility of many government buildings and spaces assume that while there may be disabled students or citizens, disabled people wouldn't be governors themselves. Certainly the ableism embedded in many of the communicative and cognitive spheres of political life also might stigmatize less visible forms of disability as well. So while, the steep steps give us this metaphor to help us think about physical access and the fact that somebody with crutches or a wheelchair would need to go to the back of the Parliament building, right? We need to go to the back of the university building. That's just a metaphor because folks with a range of other different types of disabilities are encountering similar types of barriers, right? Okay, so that's the first part, steep steps. And I want to focus then on the alternatives we're given, right? As we often kind of temporarily or minimally adapt our institutions for disabled people. In my work, I put forward the metaphor of the retrofit as a way to think about our reactions to those steep steps. And I've given you an example already in the fact that in the building that I work in, we have those steep steps in the front, and the elevator itself is a freight elevator, and it's to the very back of the building, and it's as far away from the classrooms and offices as it can be, right? So the building measures up to the AODA, for example. It has an elevator, right? But there's a message that's sent through the deprioritization of the access of disabled people. And that works in the physical space, and it works in lots of other ways as well. An example that I often give is, and I'm showing a slide here from the University of Hull in the UK. This student, Sarah Marie da Silva, posted this on Twitter or X here. And this is the classroom that she deals with to take in her zoology lectures there. We can recognize buildings like this from different educational settings. It's an amphitheater style classroom. So you come in at the back, and that's the highest point in the room. Students go down a set of stairs to access tables that are laid out as the room goes downwards, right? So there's a whole bunch of students in this classroom, and they're sitting, they have their laptops open, they have their ice caps, and they're taking in the lecture. Sarah Marie is in a manual wheelchair, and she's sitting at the back of the room at the entryway, and she looks angry, right? Her arms are crossed, she's frustrated. There's really only one spot in the entire room for her to sit and take in the lecture. It's as far away from the lecturer as possible. Obviously, this room it doesn't imagine that a disabled person could be the lecturer, right? Could be the teacher. But also I want to point out, if you look at the door at the back of the room, and maybe other people have already seen this, but it's a push button door. Like that's a $10,000 or $15,000 door. And if you go on the University of Hull website, this room is noted as an accessible room because it has that push button door, automatic door, right? But we can tell that in practice, in fact, that door is kind of a hazard, right? Sarah Marie would have to wait for every single other student to enter the room before she can go and take that spot at the back of the room. If somebody comes late and they open that door, it's going to open and hit her. If there's another student in a wheelchair, there's no space for that student, right? But this to me captures that idea of the retrofit. We have laws in place that say our buildings need to be accessible, right? And so we follow the letter of the law without thinking that in practice, it's not actually improving the situation for people with disabilities at all, right? We saw some of this through the pandemic when you walked into stores, right? And they had tiny plexiglass sheets that definitely weren't stopping the spread of COVID, right? But were allowing the business to stay open, right? So looking at an image like this, I think it distills some of the ways that we, invite disability in the door. We count it, right? We add it to diversity statistics, right? But then the culture actually is not changed, right? No lasting changes are made to account for the presence, the participation, the thriving of disabled people. Right. My point here is that I think these kind of retrofitted processes are part of every workplace where disabled people seek accommodations. Everywhere that disabled people have to ask for temporary adjustments, and they get worn out by these processes, right? But also by the fact that the access is only partway there, right? And I think some of these things allow workplaces to resist making larger structural changes. Right? How are disabled people treated as surprises, as temporary in your own spheres, right? Can you recognize the ways that our laws function to give disabled people rights, but also to ensure that those rights are minimal, right? Or sometimes mismatched with the needs that disabled people have. So retrofit then becomes an example of how this works, right? I think it's interesting that in my own workplace, and I'm sure in some of yours, even the fact that I'm giving this talk remotely today, right? We've seen over the past 3 or 4 years that we've made changes. We've redesigned things in ways that we didn't think we could before. In higher education, there was no opportunity for students to participate in classes remotely until all of a sudden, when disabled students asked for this a lot, right? And they were told no, until all of a sudden, everybody was remote. Because that allowed the university to keep functioning. And the universities then really went to bat to prove that that was valuable and the same type of education to take the same type of tuition dollars, right? Even though for decades they've been telling disabled people that that was not an accommodation that they could make, right? But in that process, we learned how to do things like provide remote access, like providing transcripts or captioning video, sharing those things so that students could access them at any time. And those are all retrofits too. And I think they're important. I think we need to hold on to them. They're all places to start, right? So question is, what did you do in your own profession to accommodate pandemic conditions? Did some of those things increase access more generally? And can you keep doing those things? So as you can guess, I've given the steep steps, I've given the retrofit. This is a kind of Goldilocks or Three Little Pigs type scenario. Now I want to try to give some more ideas and examples that can help us think about designing for and through disability in the future, rather than the ways that disabled people have been excluded in the past. And the example that I use for this is something called universal design. So if I can show the next slide. This is a third kind of spatial metaphor, and it's an architectural concept. The example that I often use is the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, which is in Winnipeg. And I'm not sure if anybody has been to it, but it's a very unique experience. In part because of, instead of the steps we saw in the previous images, the center of this space, architecturally, but also in terms of its experience, is a level entranceway, not stairs, but ramps. Right? The building itself looks like a large spiral with ribbons of stone wrapping around it and narrowing towards the sky. But everyone comes in the same way on the ground level, and that spiraling and ribboning is mirrored by the ramps throughout the space. If I can show the next slide there. On the interior, a series of ramps crisscrosses the space and provides a central metaphor for the argument that the building is making and the stories it tells. This slide here shows an overhead view of those crisscrossing ramps, which are made of this beautiful alabaster stone. And the ramps take every visitor through the same journey. The inspiration is this design philosophy called universal design. If I can go to the next slide. Oh, no, sorry, go back. So the Canadian Museum of Human Rights defines universal design in this way, right? Disability is not a special condition of a few people. Disability is ordinary and affects most of us for part of our lives. If a design works well for people with disabilities, it works better for everybody. And then also that usability and aesthetics are mutually compatible. So the artistic view of a building can be compatible with the fact that it's going to be made accessible for everybody. The opposite of having a freight elevator, right? Instead of stairs that only some people can climb, instead of ramps around the back of the building, right? The center of the space and its message are about accessibility for all bodies. I think it matters at a Museum of Human Rights, but it should matter in all of our cultural institutions, right? It should matter where you work, where you need to be in your community as well. So if we think about this and return to the Parliament building stairs, right? If I can go to the next slide. There is a project, and it's why everything's been ripped up there for a very long time, but it's designed to rethink that entryway. From their own materials, the government states that, quote, the parliamentary precinct intends to be a leading example in the development of accessible environments, making the site and buildings more accessible, family-friendly, and inclusive of all Canadians and visitors. And I think it's an interesting example, and we could probably talk a lot about it if we wanted to, but in this artist rendering that you'll see here, we still have the stairs, right? But there's a way to kind of come around a rampway underneath the stairs into another entrance. it's interesting. There's somebody being pushed in a wheelchair. It looks like an elderly woman being pushed by an elderly man. There's somebody else in a manual wheelchair. Most people seem to be coming around this ramp and using that entryway. But those stairs are still there. And I just want to point that out, that a lot of times these accessible features are also designed so you can keep the old ones, right? And that seems to be going on a little bit in this design. But it will be very interesting to see how the experience of this reshapes how people think about access to government, right? And how people utilize that space. The question then is, how do we build the future of large institutions in healthcare, in government, in education, in the rest of the country, right? In our cities and in the rest of the country like this, rather than like the steep steps, or rather than putting a ramp around the back of the building, right? In disability rights history, there's something that we call the electronic curb cut effect. And it's this idea that many of the technologies that we now take for granted, technologies that improve everybody's quality of life, they were originally designed only for disabled people. And the truth is, every single cool thing that your cell phone does, right, your smartphone does, almost all of those things were originally really expensive, really difficult to get technologies only for disabled people, right? And now they've reshaped how we all interact with the world, right? Universal design has in fact already changed our world. It's just better design, right? I think universal design then also allows us to understand disability from a justice and a cultural perspective. Disability as an identity and a culture rather than a medical and a legal phenomena, right? It asks us to foreground intersectionality, and that means in Canada that we understand that disablement disproportionately impacts Black and Indigenous people. It means that we never forget the ways that those interactions happen, right? It also means that we listen to disabled people and allow them to shape our future rather than privileging only service professionals. It means that the goal is not a better, in my case, college or university for disabled people. It means the goal is a better college or university, a better society, a better city of Ottawa for everyone. For the last decade, if I could go to the next slide, I've been working, so I want to point out a couple of resources here. First, my book, Academic Ableism, is free and available online in an open access version. So if anyone's interested in reading that, it's there. But also attached to that book is a long list of universal design ideas for teaching. And I call them places to start because that's how I want people to approach them, as things that you could try tomorrow. Right. And I point those out because I think they are about teaching, they are about classroom settings, but I think we're all involved in teaching in some way, shape, or form in our jobs and in our lives, whether we work in classrooms or not. And so I think that those are resources that people could apply to the way that you facilitate meetings in your workplace or the way that you facilitate events, right? And that they can help us work together to build a world that is more inclusive than the one that we've inherited. So I want to thank you for your time today, and I hope we can talk some more and that I can answer your questions.
Thank you again. That was so wonderful, Jay. Thank you for joining us. The awareness you have brought to the concepts of ableism and disableism provides an excellent starting point to reference as we work towards incorporating universal design in all our future projects. I would now like to invite Megan Richards who is the new program manager at the City of Ottawa for accessibility, to moderate the question and answer period. Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you, Lucille. I'll give a quick visual description of myself. I am a youngish woman with brown hair and a ponytail and big glasses. I'm wearing a black sweater and I'm joining today from a meeting room at City Hall. So all participants now have the opportunity to ask questions for our keynote speaker, Dr. Jay Dolmage. Please enter your question in the question and answer box found at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can ask questions in English or French. If you would like to ask a question in ASL or LSQ or require accessibility supports to ask your question, please let us know in the chat box. So I'll start with this question for you, Jay. Through your work in accessibility advocacy, do you find that you often run into people arguing for the status quo or downplaying the necessity of addressing accessibility issues when planning new projects? If so, how do you address this?
Yeah, I think it's tough because you actually hear it all the time, right? One of the most common things I hear from other educators is there are no disabled students in my class, right? So I think there's two ways to approach that. One is that people are wrong. That the truth is, because of ableism and disableism, a lot of people are not going to disclose disability, right? It's definitely not something that they're going to feel comfortable in a first interaction disclosing, right? To begin with, because it doesn't, in education, for example, the accommodations you get are pretty limited. There's a big risk, right, for not much that you're going to get back, right? I pointed out some of the statistics, and these are things I think we can apply across our culture, but the rate of people with disabilities versus the rate of people who are disclosing their disabilities, there's a big gulf there, right? In higher education, they estimate that 75% of disabled students, their colleges or universities will never know that they were disabled. And that especially around mental health related disabilities, that those students will leave and know that they could have sought help and they will not have sought help. We'll lose them before they even ask for help, right? So I think that's the truth. There are disabled people at any event you're planning, in any context, and the dynamics and the politics around disclosure are more complicated than you think, right? So it becomes a kind of responsibility in that context to plan for disabled people, right? Because they're going to be there. But also, I think, it's a better event when you've planned through disability. And it's more accessible for everybody, right? And that's not just for disabled people, it's for everyone. That's a difficult argument to make, right? Because you don't want to offer accessibility only when it helps everybody else, right? You want to offer it because disabled people deserve to be part of things, right? And they have the right to be. But the truth is, when you use principles of universal design, for example, it's better for folks with different linguistic backgrounds, right? It's better in my context for first generation college students, right? It's better for international students. There's all these ways that we have benefits that come from planning through disability. And the alternative is that people are excluded, and they may not even ever tell you how they've been excluded, right? But we lose their participation. And I think, most of the time I want to be able to have context, because I want to say, your event is about, I don't know, building culture in your community. Well, you need disability culture as part of that. Your event is about, infrastructure. Well, disabled people are experts on infrastructure because they experience the barriers that are created all the time. You need their input, right? So you better plan for their involvement, right? But almost any example of the purpose of what you're doing, you can build into an explanation that shows the need to plan for disabled people to be welcomed, whether they come or not, right? And whether you ever know that they're there or not. I hope that kind of answers the question. I think there's a case to be made that they're there, whether you know it or not, but also there's a case to be made there that planning for them to not have to be treated like a surprise is going to allow you to design an event, an interaction that's going to be better for everybody.
I think that was a great answer, Jay. And I think that applies across the board to city staff when working with residents, to anybody with employees with disabilities. You may never know if staff have a disability or not unless they come forward and request accommodations. But if we build into our processes, accommodations by design, then there doesn't have to be that planning. And there was a few comments earlier when you were speaking about the student in the back, if you're far away and you have a learning disability or you're hard of hearing, then there's even more barriers. And we got some comments along the lines of, needing to plan in advance before going somewhere as a person with a disability. If you have a meeting, are there stairs? Are the facilities accessible? So it certainly goes a long way to have that kind of baked in from the very outset to make sure that everybody is able to have access.
Yeah.
Great
Can
answer.
I'll say something really quickly. Okay, so universal design, there's an idea called universal design for learning, and there are 3 parts of universal design for learning. One is that we give materials and information out in a variety of formats, right? So like today, that means ASL, that means interpretation, that means a YouTube link later, that means transcripts, right? And that's important. I really think that's one of the best things people can do to think about access. In teaching, we've got these 50-minute races for knowledge within 12-week races, right? You got to get all the information into your mind in the 50 minutes that you're together in a classroom, right? And that's just not good for learning. So having transcripts, having access to course notes at other times so you can take the time to read them and process them, that's really important for a wide variety of events, right? So that also for people who can't make it, right? So that they can still be involved, right? But also for the people who are there but are going to need more time to access that material, right? The second piece then is making sure that people can get involved in a variety of ways, right? So there's not just one way to participate, right? And so I think those are two really positive things to think about when you're planning any kind of event or interaction. Can I make the information available in more than one way? And can I allow the person to participate in flexible ways, not just the way that I like to participate, right? Because if we do things always assuming that everybody else learns or interacts or participates the ways that we do, then we just continue with the same structures that have excluded people in the past.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, well, it's a comment. Thank you for an excellent presentation, Jay. What was the impetus or the starting point of your advocacy?
I mean, for me, it was some of my own access needs, but also, I grew up in the disability rights movement in Canada. My family was Dolmage versus Muskoka Board of Education was really the first case where we were fighting for my brother's right to go to school with my sister and I in our neighborhood. And we lost, right, with the Ontario Supreme Court of Appeal. But that led to other cases that allowed students to go to their community schools, not be bussed away to a segregated school. When we lost that court case, though, we moved to another school board so that my brother could go to school with us, right? But so I very much understood, because I grew up in hospitals and courts as well, I understood the need to fight for that access, and that even when you had the access, that didn't mean it was inclusive, right? And so when I came into higher education, I looked around and I was like, there's so much more advocacy that has to happen here. It's so much more normalized. The elitism of it has made it seem to people like ableism is justified, in fact, right? That we should be excluding people, that people with disabilities shouldn't make it, right? Or if they didn't work hard enough, So that was the impetus for me. But I also, I was a student in the 90s, and that was the kind of disability rights movement, right? That was when disability studies as a field of study was kind of growing. And so I could go to the library and learn about these things. So the timing was good in that way. But interestingly, I've been in the field now for, coming on 30 years, and there's still so much work to do.
Absolutely. We've come a long way. We've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question is, how can we include our decision makers, city council or other leadership teams in accessible design and updates as needed when it meets the OBC? So we don't need to deal with these, sorry, I'm trying to read as I go.
Sure.
So if we're getting kind of, I guess the question is, if we're getting, well, it meets design, it meets the code, how do we encourage those in leadership positions, city councils, et cetera, to want to exceed that for a more accessible and universal design?
Yeah, I think one of the keys is that we need to be consulting and talking to disabled people, right? Another piece of universal design history is that it was first this kind of idea that was called usability. And it was like you keep getting feedback from users to understand whether you're doing it right? So it's an ongoing process. And I think there's been a systemic exclusion of disabled people in government, right? The question was, sorry, no, I don't see it there, but decision makers, policy makers, right? There's been a systemic exclusion of disabled people. And so there has to be a systemic inclusion, right? We need to be able to see not just physical space, but also the interactions we have, consultations we have, communication we have. We need to see those things from disabled people's perspective and listen to them. That's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I have. You can't understand how any of these things work if you haven't viewed them through the experience of disabled people. And that's the only way to address the kind of systematized ableism that we live with, right? And so, you have to employ and pay disabled people to audit our processes, to give feedback. And that's so important. Even in the sense that we spend millions of dollars to retrofit things for accessibility, but they very rarely are done in a logical way. That push button door in the example that I gave is a perfect one, but University of Waterloo, you see the same thing. You'll have a push button on one door that leads to a door that then doesn't have a push button. Well, why did you spend the money on the one button without the other? But if you ask disabled people, and if they're involved in the process, then the way that we redesign space, the way that we build things from the ground up, right, those things will actually work, right? And otherwise we don't have much imagination for how to build things more flexibly. And I guess the knock-on effect is when disabled people are the designers, we've seen throughout history, those designs are better for everybody. Any of the kitchen utensils you have, they're so much better than they were 35, 40 years ago because of disabled, design through disability. You don't cut yourself opening a can anymore, I hope. And that's thanks to universal design. It's better for everyone.
Absolutely. If you think about all the innovations that have started out as accommodations, even text messaging, something that's a commonplace for I think most people on a daily, moment by moment basis, started off as accommodation. So you're absolutely right on that. I had a couple questions about employment. So, if spaces have addressed kind of the physical accessibility side of things, do you have any thoughts on, breaking the glass ceiling, on promotion of people with disabilities? We even hear concerns regularly about retention of people with disabilities, and organizations having really ambitious goals to hire and retain people with disabilities, and not meeting those goals. Do you have any thoughts about that, Jay?
That's such a big question. I can't handle the whole thing, but I'll say two simple things to start. Okay. And this is part of we're working very hard in higher ed to build actual policies for disabled faculty and staff, because they don't exist, right? We've over-policied things for students, but then at the same time, they don't exist because we don't imagine disabled faculty and staff, right? If the pipeline is we've not imagined it at all. But two things. One is we need systems where folks, where their confidentiality is protected in disclosure, right? Too often, if we're going to disclose and ask for accommodation, that disclosure is happening to people who are not professional in protecting our confidentiality, right? And you know, diagnoses like mine, they're stigmatized. Are you going to disclose that to, for me, a supervisor, a dean, a chair? Those people determine whether I'm promoted. Those people, you know, and that's who I would have to disclose to. So you're not going to disclose, right? And then you don't know how to make changes in your workplace because it's not happening. And that's when we lose people, right? Because without the disclosure and the accommodation and the adjustment, you're just marking yourself out to be worn out by ableism, right? So protecting people's confidentiality and disclosing that often means having a central office or officer who's going to handle that, right? And who comes from the kind of profession where that's part of their professional responsibility is confidentiality, right? For example, in Ontario universities, undergrad students do not need to name their disability to get an accommodation. That was fought for. It was a successful human rights complaint, but it's a great protection, right? The other piece then is accommodations and adjustments cannot come out of unit budgets. There needs to be centralized funds, right, that are protected for those purposes. Most accommodations cost very, very little. Right. But in my own workplace, for example, I have to go to my chair and disclose to a colleague who controls my future. Right. And my accommodation comes out of the department budget. So it's like, are we having coffee at meetings? Are we bringing in guest speakers, or are we accommodating our staff and faculty? Right. And both of those things, I think, are like, they also make organizations extremely liable to human rights complaints, because I think both of those things are protected by the Ontario Human Rights Code, but too many places are not doing it properly. Right. And so you kind of got to look at your own organization, or, you know, talk to somebody and say, hey, is this how we're doing it? How are we doing it? So the other thing I'd say is, like, a good organization wants to retain its employees for the course of their career. Right. Every employee will be disabled at some point in their career, right? So that should be part of the plan, and not in a negative way, but like, we want you to be here for a long time. We're thinking about caregiving and bereavement. You're going to maybe care for someone with a disability. That person could be you, you know? So you just have to build those things from the beginning. Finally, I think the employers that do that and that show that they care have a huge advantage, right, in retaining and attracting great workers, right, a great workforce. And it will differentiate you from other employers. So anyway, that's small. There's so much more you could say about that, but those are like 2 or 3 little steps and a couple arguments for them that I think lots of people could make in their own workplace, like today or tomorrow.
Thanks, Jay. I know that that's a loaded question. It could probably be a whole other event on its own. So thanks for giving us some thoughts on that. We have a question to be asked in American Sign Language, and we've promoted the participant so they can use their video. So I'll ask our ASL interpreter to support us.
Hello. Can everybody see me? Yeah, I was unable to turn my camera on, and I had to ask the tech people to support me with that. So I'm not sure why that was happening, but I waited patiently until I was able to turn my camera on. My question is actually for Mark, the mayor. I think he's gone now. So I wanted to say hello. My name is Aziz. Aziz Ka. And I have gone to a number of meetings for the city of Ottawa. I've spoken to the mayor many times. I wanted to address the library and the gym and the swimming pool. And then there's the playground that is neighboring that area. these play structures on the playground. And there was a sign that was installed there with the fingerspelled alphabet for American Sign Language. Oh, pardon me. Yes, there is that, but there's nothing there that actually says anything more about, hello, how are you? Some sort of indicator to encourage children to learn sign language so that they can communicate with people who use sign language. And I just feel like this is something that, we're behind on, that we could improve upon. There is that sign at the library, but there could be more. We need that. We also need it at the library. So there's one in the playground, but it needs to be in other places. And if I could just say one more thing. For events at the City of Ottawa, I often request interpreters, and I'm told that there are no interpreters. They can't provide interpreters, so they'll ask for volunteers. Pardon me, they have photographers there, they have people there that are paid for the event, but then they don't provide interpreters. So there still needs to be more done for accessibility, and that's really important to me. I would like to access all the events that I'm interested in attending.
Thank you, Aziz. That's really great feedback for our office, and I think can be applied across the board by those who are looking to increase accessibility for the deaf community. We'll connect offline about your specific comment about the library and the opportunities that you suggested. But I certainly agree that there's always an opportunity to be more inclusive for the deaf community, and would love the opportunity to chat more with you about that.
Yeah, I would just kind of amplify that, and I love that you.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, so just let me know at any time when you want to be in touch. And I think you already have my email.
That's perfect. An example, right, of consulting, right? An example of making those connections. I think that's really important.
Sorry, muted. I think that wraps up the time that we have for questions today. So Jay, I just want to thank you so much for your time, for your insights shared with us today. For those in attendance, we will be sharing a recording to the event, including Jay's talk and all of the links that were shared today. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. Before handing it back over to Lucille and wrapping up, we had some technical issues earlier, so I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Holly Ellingwood, who's the Vice Chair of our Accessibility Advisory Committee, and I'd like to invite Holly to say a few words. So over to you.
Hello, thank you everyone for having me. I'm so honored to be with you all today. Thank you to the Mayor of the City, also to the great speaking to Chair Vanya Karam for those great points, and to Dr. and Professor Dolmage. Wow, that was amazing. Universal design is better for everyone. I think that's one of the things that I really am taking home with me today and really felt in my heart as a person with a disability. And one of the things that really spoke to me is how you spoke about society doesn't imagine us in those spaces, in those roles. I know that's certainly been part of my life. I'm an outlier even among outliers. I'm a transgender person. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a person with a visible disability. I'm also a person with 4 degrees. I have a job full time. It's very hard to do. not because I'm somebody with a disability, but because I have to navigate all the attitudinal barriers. A society that doesn't see me as viable as an employee is also the same society that doesn't see me viable as a partner, as a parent, as a person in a store that will buy something where I'm never asked, how can I serve you? When people talk about being exhausted, you'll see a lot of different surveys that say people with disabilities tend to be more tired at the end of the day. And that doesn't have so much to do with our disabilities, our health. It has to do with the impact on our health and having to navigate a society that doesn't seem to want to include us by its design. That's why the whole conversation about creating more universal design is so important. It's so important. And here's the other impact of that. It's really hard for us to see ourselves in those spaces, in those roles, because we don't have that representation that exists. So I'd like to, before closing out and handing it back, is to leave you with these two things. One, it's not about consultation after the fact. It's always about co-creation. Always about co-creation. That co-development is so key to get it from that ground up, to get it from the foundations, to build something that is truly meaningful and inclusive for everyone. Indigenous, racialized, women, people of all ages, different backgrounds, and different abilities. Because we are many cultures. The other thing I want to leave you with, and this is something, it's not a challenge, it's a request, it's a hope. Please dare to dream, dare to dream, dare to imagine yourselves in those spaces and those roles. I always strive, and I know it's hard, everyone. I know it's hard as people with disabilities to fight that good fight. Please keep up the good work, because every step, every little space that we get is that little space closer, so that we can be in those spaces and those roles, and so that the children and the generations that come after us Merci.
Thank you very much, Holly. Did you, sorry, I'm not sure you finished your sentence. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you'd like to finish what you were saying.
No, sorry, I guess it cut out because of the recording part. I was just saying for everyone to please, strive to dream, strive to imagine yourselves in those roles and those spaces. And if we keep doing that and we keep working towards that more universal design, then society itself will get better. And that will be a very beautiful thing. And it may not all be in our lifetime, but I also think about the generations to come as we work towards a better future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. And thank you, Jay, and thank you, Megan. This has been a wonderful, wonderful event. It's been wonderful to spend time talking about ableism, disableism, and celebrating International Day of Persons with Disabilities ahead of itself on Sunday, December 3rd, and to gain insight into bias, awareness, ableism, and universal design specifically. I also want to acknowledge, Holly, that, we certainly at the Accessibility Office recognize the exhaustion of people with disabilities. And I love the word co-creation. I really appreciate that word because that's exactly what we should be striving for. Universal design co-created with people with disabilities from our community. So thank you. It's been wonderful hearing from both of you this morning. Before we go, I encourage everyone to get involved with us. Avant de mettre fin à la rencontre, j'encourage tout le monde à participer.
Before ending the meeting today, I would like to encourage everyone to work with us.
Regarding accessibility on the slide on the screen, as well as in the chat. Whether you have advice, concerns, ideas, or anything else related to accessibility in the city that you'd like to talk about, please get in touch with us. The Accessibility Office's general email address has been shared. Alternatively, you can also contact 311. Vos commentaires sont toujours les bienvenus. que vous ayez
Your
des
comments are always welcome, whether it be needs, requests, or ideas. Do not hesitate to contact us.
adapt our policies and identify and eliminate barriers. You can also register for the city's Accessibility Spotlight e-newsletter, that's a mouthful, on ottawa.ca to receive updates on what the city is doing to increase accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities. Together, we can work towards making Ottawa an inclusive, accessible, and sustainable city for all. Ensemble, nous pouvons unir nos efforts afin de faire
Together,
d'Ottawa
we can work together to make sure that Ottawa is a inclusive and accessible city for everyone. Thank you, everybody. I wish you a wonderful day and a wonderful holidays.
and safe holiday season. We wish you a very happy International Accessibility Day of Persons with Disabilities. Thank you so much. Thank you for all joining.